We turn now to the Middle East. Power plus impunity leads to abuse, and abuse unchecked almost always becomes sexual abuse. This is true throughout history, it's true throughout the world, and it's certainly been true in Israel over the last 2.5 years. There is now reams and reams and reams of evidence of sexual abuse in Israeli detention centres since October the 7th. Now, it wouldn't be true to say that Western media has not reported this. It has. But the contrast with the reporting of alleged sexual abuse by Palestinians on October the 7th is extraordinary. I made a film for Al Jazeera's investigative unit called October 7, and we looked into this in enormous depth. There, the coverage was wall-to-wall, it was continuous, it was graphic, it was lurid, it was highly emotive, and it played a key role in creating the emotional environment which made possible the genocide, despite the fact that if you looked at it very carefully, the evidence was flimsy. And although sexual violence by the Israelis in detention centres is reported in the West, there remains one crime that is taboo for Western media. I first reported it in my film Gaza for Al Jazeera's investigative unit in October 2024.
اجوا اخذوا شاب كان موجود اخذوه ضربوه بعد ما ضربوه نيموه على الارض على بطنه ربطوا ايديه وربطوا رجليه واقفين تقريبا 9 جنود او 8 جنود كانوا موقفين فجأة جردوه من ملابسه السفلية اجا كابتن كان موجود اجا زي وضع مادة اشي حاجة اشي يعني على مؤخرة الشاب واطلقوا كان في كلب موجود اطلقوا عليه الكلب كلب هذا يعني كيف اقول لك مش مارس الجنس اغتصب الشاب اغتصبوه في معنى الكلمة اغتصاب تام.
That was pretty much the first report of the Israelis' use of dogs to rape Palestinian inmates, and it was predictably ignored in Western media. I spoke to a remarkable woman. Her name is Maha Husseini. She's the head of media at an NGO called Euromed Human Rights Monitor, which last month produced a report called Another Genocide Behind Walls, which contains detailed evidence of the use of sexual violence by the Israelis in detention centres. Maha has been in Gaza since day one of the genocide, and she's been displaced 8 times. She spoke to us from Gaza City. Your organisation, Euromed Human Rights Monitor, has produced this extraordinary report, Another Genocide Behind Walls, which looks particularly at the use of sexual torture in Israeli detention centres. Can you summarise for us very briefly what that report says?
Yeah, this report is actually the outcome of work we've been doing since the beginning of the genocide. Overall, we documented at least 7 forms of sexual violence practiced against Palestinians in Israeli places of detention, including rape, actual cases of rape, threats of rape, forced nudity, assaults on genitals, verbal and physical harassment, and coerced exposure to rape, where the Israeli, of course, officers and soldiers actually force Palestinians to witness the rape of other inmates or other detainees. Of course, the majority of these testimonies actually belong to men other than women, and this does not mean that women did not or were not subjected to sexual violence as much as men, but because we are speaking about a conservative society where women actually don't feel very comfortable speaking about being subjected to sexual violence. Many men described being raped several times over the course of several days.
One thing that leaps out of your report is the use of dogs to rape male detainees. There's other evidence around this now as well. How solid and widespread is the evidence for that particular crime now?
Yes, actually, this is not the first time that we documented cases of dogs abusing, or trained dogs actually abusing or raping Palestinian detainees inside Israeli jails. In this report particularly, we documented several cases. I will just read one of the shocking cases that we documented. One detainee told us that he was detained, of course, in Sdeti Man, and this is where most of the violations occur. He said that they took a group of detainees and me to the corridor between the sections and forced us to strip completely naked. The soldiers brought in several dogs. One of them urinated on me. One of the dogs then raped me, penetrated my anus in a trained manner when I was being beaten. This continued for several minutes. I felt profoundly humiliated and violated. Other, of course, men we met said that after they were raped by the soldiers, they also were raped by dogs in the very same day. And this is something that also confirms that this is a systematic policy, because no army trains dogs on raping humans unless this is something that is accepted by the highest rank in the authority.
These are almost unimaginably horrific accounts, aren't they, Maha? But thank you very much for joining us, and keep safe.
Thank you, Richard.
I also spoke to a former Israeli army intelligence officer who has done the work that Western journalists have not, and brought together and collated all of the evidence about the Israelis' use of dogs to rape Palestinian inmates. His name is Shael Ben Ephraim, and he spoke to us from California, where he now lives.
It really started by accident well over a year ago, when a friend of mine, childhood friend actually, was stationed at the Sde Teiman base. And at that time, I was a fairly passionate Zionist, supporter of Israel. And he told me, listen, there's things going on in this Sde Teiman prison that you will absolutely not believe. They're so awful. And so I looked into it, and he put me in touch with two guards who had worked there. And they told me about all the torture that had occurred in Sde Teiman, but also some things that hadn't appeared in the media, like the fact that they were killing inmates and leaving them around the others in order to serve as a warning to them and that sort of thing. And I published it on X, and it got a pretty big response. And that played a very large role in my moving away from Zionism. I kept in touch with one of the two guards. I was introduced to another by the guard that I had talked to. I had seen the reports that dogs had been used to sexually assault inmates in Sde Teiman. So I just asked them about it. And to my, I guess, surprise, horror, they both confirmed it. One said that he'd seen dogs being used, and the other said that he'd heard talk about dogs being used. From my experience, when inmates in Israeli prisons testify to something, it is true. And it almost always is confirmed by the facts. After Zionists and Israel supporters deny it and say that it's just hearsay, it's almost always supported by the facts. Believe the victims, especially when there's several testimonies.
I'm particularly drawn to this subject because I reported this in my film Gaza for Al Jazeera's investigative unit. Back in October 2024. Now, at that time, it was pretty much the first report that was out there in the public about the use of dogs to rape Palestinian prisoners. The work you've done, you've essentially collated, brought together what is out there in the public domain since. Could you just sort of sum that up for us? How much evidence is there now out there in the public domain about this?
Well, as far as I know, there's testimony from at least 20 people. And then I added the testimony of two guards. So that was the first sort of corroboration by any Israeli sources. I was very skeptical about this early on. It sounds to Israelis like something that would be just invented to make Israel seem like the deepest, darkest, most demonic country in the world. You know, we're used to thinking the whole world is anti-Semitic and out to get us. But the testimony is consistent, it's believable, and guards confirmed it to me. So I'm convinced. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see someone boasting about this. We've already had some cases of settlers and soldiers arresting Palestinians and threatening them that they will be raped and that they will be raped by dogs, specifically.
Because we had that case again at Sde Teiman where a rape was caught on video and it was exposed in Israeli media, wasn't it? Now, what's happened to the soldiers involved in that? As I understand it, the charges have been dropped, haven't they?
Yes, the charges were dropped. The only person who faced real consequences for that was Yifat Yerushalmi, the military attorney who leaked the video.
How just some of the cases you have collated are quite extraordinary. One man who was raped by a dog, he recalled that when he screamed, the guards beat him for disturbing the dog. Another victim, he emphasized that the dog appeared trained and knew exactly what it was doing. Is this systematic, or are these rogue elements?
It's clearly systematic. I don't believe that Netanyahu and Katz ever sat there and decided that dogs should be used to rape inmates. What I think happened is that some commanders who were in charge of the dogs thought this would be a good idea. They did, and no one stopped them. These cases are almost exclusively in Sde Teiman that I'm aware of. There are a couple of cases elsewhere. So it's systematic, it's Sde Teiman for sure. And anything that happens in Sde Teiman tends to spread elsewhere. That's sort of ground zero.
You've served in the Israeli military in intelligence. You're an Israeli. You're brought up in Israel. Explain to us how people can arrive at a place where they are prepared to do this sort of thing and to tolerate those around them doing this sort of thing.
Well, as a disclaimer, I want to say that I haven't lived in Israel since October 7th. And I think that's important because that's kept me separated from a certain psychosis that the Israeli people have undergone. The hatred towards Palestinians in general is incredibly high, but the people who actually perpetrated October 7th, or so we even suspected of perpetrating October 7th, is at levels that are psychotic. Doing this sort of thing with dogs sends a message to Palestinians that the worst things in the world will happen to them unless they leave.
Shaila, thank you very much for joining us.
Sure, thank you. A pleasure.
The treatment of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli detention centres is almost unimaginably barbaric. And because of the work of people like Shael and Maha, no one can say they didn't know. The failure of Western governments to bring any meaningful pressure on the Israelis over this issue is simply grotesque.